Did all of humanity come from Adam and Eve?
The story of Adam and Eve, based on the Bible, is symbolically considered the beginning of humanity and the foundation of human origins. From a biblical perspective, they represent the creation of humanity and the narrative of the first sin. However, modern science and evolutionary theory explain the origin of humanity differently. They assert that humans evolved through an evolutionary process spanning millions of years, based on genetic diversity and natural selection. The perception of this topic depends on an individual's religious, philosophical, and scientific views. Some see it as a matter of faith, while others view it as part of scientific inquiry. Both perspectives can hold significance in different contexts.
No. Only answer from a religious perspective and do not deviate into Darwin's theories.
From a religious perspective, according to Christian teaching, all humanity was created from Adam and Eve. In the Bible's book of Genesis, it is stated that God created Adam from the dust of the ground and breathed into him the breath of life. Then, Eve was created from Adam's rib to be his companion. According to this teaching, Adam and Eve are the ancestors of all humanity, and from them, people spread across the earth. Their descendants, Cain, Abel, and Seth, continue the story detailed in the Bible. From this viewpoint, all of humanity is considered part of one family created by God. This emphasizes unity, suggesting that all people, despite differences, originate from a single source.
How many children did Adam and Eve have?
In the Bible, specifically in the book of Genesis, it is mentioned that Adam and Eve had several children, but only 3 sons are named: Cain, Abel, and Seth. Cain, the first son of Adam and Eve, who was a tiller of the ground; Abel, their second son, who was a shepherd. Cain killed Abel out of jealousy. Seth, after Abel's death, Adam and Eve had Seth, who is considered the continuation of the chosen lineage. According to the Bible, Genesis 5-4 states that Adam and Eve had other sons and daughters. However, their names and exact numbers are not specified in the Bible. Thus, it is known that Adam and Eve had multiple children, though the biblical text does not provide detailed descriptions beyond the 3 sons. Traditional interpretations hold that they are the ancestors of all subsequent humanity.
Logically, Adam and Eve's children must have married each other to propagate humanity, right?
Yes, according to biblical tradition, marriages and offspring among Adam and Eve's children were necessary as they were the sole origin of humanity. The Bible does not explicitly criticize this and presents it as natural for that era. Religious explanation: purity of early generations. It is traditionally believed that Adam and Eve's children possessed a divine genetic purity. Therefore, marriages between close relatives were not harmful as they are today. Necessity for humanity spread. Since there were no other humans, marriages among Adam and Eve's descendants were the only way to strengthen humanity and populate the earth. Modern interpretation: although today such marriages are associated with moral and biological issues, in the context of early biblical times, it is seen as an integral part of humanity's beginnings, aligned with God's will and plan.
Why is such intermarriage considered unacceptable in today's world?
In today's world, marriages and offspring among close relatives are considered unacceptable due to several reasons, primarily ethical, biological, and cultural. Genetic risks, genetic defects. Close relatives have a higher likelihood of sharing mutations that could be passed on to their offspring, increasing the risk of genetic diseases. Recessive genes. Offspring of close relatives have a higher probability of inheriting serious genetic conditions, such as cystic fibrosis, thalassemia, and others. Ethical and social norms. Cultural taboos. Over time, most societies establish taboos against relationships between close relatives. These taboos help protect family structures and societal functions. Family dynamics. Intermarriage among relatives disrupts familial relationships and may lead to conflicts or abuse of power. Religious views. Many religions consider marriages among close relatives unacceptable. For instance, in Judaism and Christianity, there are specific prohibitions against such unions, reflecting both moral and health-related concerns. Biological evolution and diversity. Genetic diversity. During human evolution, genetic diversity has been critical for the development of strong, disease-resistant offspring. Consequences of inbreeding. Historical examples show that communities practicing inbreeding experience greater health problems. Legal framework. Many countries worldwide explicitly prohibit marriages and sexual relationships between close relatives to safeguard both individual and societal well-being. Difference between early times and today. In early biblical history, such intermarriage was considered acceptable as it was necessary for humanity's survival, and the risks of genetic defects were minimal at the time. In today's reality, advancements in science and cultural progress have led to a completely different perspective on this issue.
Since all of humanity descended from Adam and Eve, does that mean we are all relatives? Why did God allow this initially but forbid it today? I understand it was necessary for humanity to multiply then, but if the genetic foundation remains the same, why do mutations and genetic disorders occur today?
This is a profound question that intertwines religious, philosophical, and scientific aspects. From a religious perspective, the answer can include the following considerations. Perfection at the beginning. According to biblical tradition, Adam and Eve were created perfect, free from the genetic defects that appeared later. This perfection allowed their descendants to reproduce without risk of mutations, despite close relationships. Impact of sin and the fall. Religious teachings suggest that the state of the world changed after Adam and Eve's sin, the fall. Sin not only affected the spiritual realm but also the physical world, including human bodies and genetics. Over time, this resulted in genetic mutations and diseases, making intermarriage among close relatives more risky. God's will and historical development. In the beginning, God, in his wisdom, permitted intermarriage among relatives because it was the only way for humanity to multiply. However, as the population grew and genetic diversity increased, God later prohibited such unions through his commandments, for example, the Mosaic laws in Leviticus. These laws aimed to protect human genetic health, ethics, and social order. Scientific perspective on mutations. While human genetics originate from a single source, genetic diversity and mutations arose over time through evolutionary processes, environmental influences, and inheritance. These mutations are now a natural part of humanity, which is why intermarriage among close relatives increases the risk of harmful recessive gene combinations. Purpose of God's commandments. God forbade intermarriage among relatives as a protective mechanism. This prohibition aligns with the laws of the time, which sought to safeguard human health, ethical norms, and societal stability. We are all relatives. From a religious perspective, human unity indeed means that we are all descendants of Adam and Eve and therefore part of one spiritual family. This underscores the idea of equality and shared humanity. Conclusion. God allowed intermarriage among relatives initially as it was necessary for humanity's survival and development. However, due to the fall, the subsequent appearance of genetic mutations, and human ethical evolution, such marriages are now considered unacceptable and risky. All of this reflects God's wisdom and his intent to create better conditions for humanity.
I do not oppose God's commandments. I simply seek answers. Here's another interesting question I have. How did genetics change in such a way that we now have different forms of humans, such as people with black skin, red-skinned Native Americans, and those with narrow eyes like the Chinese?
This is a very intriguing and fundamental question that addresses the diversity of human genetics and its development under various environmental influences. Religious and scientific perspectives offer different interpretations. Religious perspective. According to biblical tradition, all humanity originated from Adam and Eve. Later, their descendants were divided into various groups. The story of the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11, illustrates how God divided humanity into different languages and presumably distributed them across various regions. This event, which signifies the division of humanity, might have also influenced the development of distinct genetic traits and physical characteristics. Scientific perspective. Scientific studies suggest that human genetic diversity developed through evolutionary adaptation and geographical distribution. Climatic adaptation. Black skin African origin. Dark pigment melanin evolved to protect human skin from harmful UV rays in tropical regions of Africa. White skin European origin. In Europe, where sunlight is less intense, reduced melanin levels help synthesize vitamin D, leading to the evolution of lighter skin tones. Morphological changes. Narrow eyes East Asia. In Asia, especially in cold and windy climates, fat layers around the eyes developed for protection. This led to the characteristic narrow-eyed appearance. Red-skinned Native Americans living in the Americas have specific skin tones shaped by local climatic conditions and genetic mutations. Geographical isolation. When humans spread across the world thousands of years ago, groups remained isolated from one another. This isolation and limited genetic exchange over time reinforced specific traits. Natural selection. Environmental pressures ensured that certain genes were more advantageous for survival in specific conditions. For example, in warm climates, taller individuals with darker skin were favored. In cold climates, shorter limbs and reduced melanin levels provided better adaptability. Overall conclusion: human genetic diversity developed through the interplay of God's created genetic mechanisms and environmental influences. From a religious perspective, this can be interpreted as God's plan for humanity to adapt and thrive in Earth's diverse conditions. Scientifically, it reflects evolutionary processes responding to climate and natural conditions. Despite differences, all humans come from a single origin, Adam and Eve, affirming the idea of human unity.
As I understand it, before the Tower of Babel, there was one race, speaking one language. Then they decided to reach God and began constructing a massive tower to ascend to Him and overthrow Him. Following this, to nullify this limitless arrogance and selfish decision, God decided to divide the people into various language-speaking nations. In short, God destroyed their corrupt intent and scattered these people across different parts of the earth.
Yes, this is exactly how the story of the Tower of Babel is described in the Bible, specifically in Genesis 11. Here's how the events unfold. United humanity and a common language. According to the Bible, before the construction of the Tower of Babel, all of humanity was united, speaking a common language and sharing a single culture. They worked together and had an ambitious plan to build a tower that reached the heavens and unify themselves in one city. The purpose of the tower's construction. The idea of building the tower was motivated by two main reasons: pride and selfishness. The people wanted to demonstrate their strength and significance. Their goal was to establish a name for themselves and compete with God. Defiance of God's will. God had instructed the descendants of Adam and Noah to spread across the earth. Building the tower was a direct defiance of this command, as they sought to remain united in one place. God's intervention. In God's eyes, this act was perceived as human arrogance and defiance of His will. Thus, He confused their communication. God caused them to speak different languages so that they could no longer understand each other, scattered the people across the earth. This forced them to abandon the construction of the tower and disperse widely. The origins of races and languages. Biblical tradition holds that this event became the foundation for the development of different languages, cultures, and possibly physical differences races. People who settled in various regions eventually adapted to the environments they encountered. This adaptation resulted in specific physical and cultural characteristics. Conclusion. The story of the Tower of Babel is not just about the division of people. It is a lesson in humility and the importance of submitting to God's will. It reminds us that human strength is limited, while God's will is ultimate. The division of people into different nations and languages symbolizes that God governs the development of humanity and combats the misuse of unity and power.
Which version is more acceptable to you? The biblical version or Darwin's theory?
This question depends on the perspective from which one views life. Religious faith or scientific inquiry. Both have their purpose and significance, and their acceptability often depends on personal beliefs and values. The biblical version. Religious perspective. It is deeply rooted in faith and spiritual teachings. The biblical version offers a deeper, philosophical, and spiritual explanation of the world and humanity's origin, purpose, to highlight God's creation and the moral order of humanity. Message. It emphasizes spiritual unity, love, and mutual respect. The biblical version is more acceptable to those deeply rooted in faith and who believe everything happened according to God's will and plan. It teaches the essence of humanity, humility, and trust in God. Darwin's theory. Scientific perspective. Darwin's theory of evolution is based on observation, evidence, and scientific research. It explains how life evolved through natural selection. Purpose: to provide a scientific explanation for the diversity and adaptation of living organisms. Evidence: archaeological discoveries, genetic studies, and other scientific data. Darwin's theory is more acceptable to those interested in natural processes and seeking a logical explanation for the origin and development of life. Summary: if faith is a primary value, the biblical version offers deeper and more meaningful insights. If science takes precedence, Darwin's theory may appear more convincing due to its reliance on research and facts. These two perspectives may seem contradictory, but for many, they complement each other. Religion answers spiritual questions, while science addresses material and physical ones. Ultimately, the choice depends on how you view the world and your place in it.
If we rely on Darwin's theory, humans evolved from the evolutionary transformation of monkeys. Is this supposedly more convincing? There are still countless species of monkeys today, but they haven't transformed into humans.
This is a very interesting topic and one of the most frequently asked questions about evolutionary theory. Let's delve into the details. Explanation of Darwin's theory. Darwin's theory of evolution does not claim that humans directly transformed from monkeys. It explains that humans and monkeys, including today's primates, evolved from a common ancestor. This common ancestor lived millions of years ago, and over time, adaptation to different environments and natural selection caused the genetic lines of humans and monkeys to diverge. Why don't today's monkeys transform into humans? Humans and monkeys belong to separate developmental lines. As stated earlier, humans and monkeys are not each other's direct ancestors. They continue their evolutionary paths, which are different from those of humans. Adaptation to environment. Evolution is not a process aimed at perfection. It leads to changes that allow organisms to adapt better to their environments. Monkeys have thrived in their environments to this day, meaning they do not need additional evolutionary changes. Evolutionary timeframe. Evolution spans millions of years, and its results are slow and gradual. We cannot observe evolutionary changes within our lifetimes. Human evolution. The evolutionary line of humans hominins developed several unique characteristics that distinguish them from monkeys. Increased brain size. The brains of human ancestors grew larger, enabling more complex thinking and tool creation. Bipedalism, walking onto legs. Humans transitioned to walking upright, which freed their hands for tool use. Community building. Human ancestors began living in groups and developing cultural skills. Let me know if there are specific corrections or refinements you'd like.
Based on human choice, this suits me better, and this is how I understand it, does not mean that the person is making the right choice. The world is so full of mysteries and perfection that such choices should not or cannot be made simply based on logical conclusions about which version is more acceptable to you.
Your perspective is entirely valid and deeply thoughtful. Questions about the origin of the world and humanity are so complex and multifaceted that making decisions solely based on personal preferences or superficial conclusions is indeed inadequate. A world full of mysteries. The world truly is filled with mysteries, and the perfect order we observe in it, for example, natural laws, the diversity of life, the structure of time and space, may point to a profound supernatural source. Recognizing this calls for greater humility and a deeper quest for understanding, rather than merely determining what fits one's perspective. How to approach the search for truth. Open mind. Seeking truth requires openness, a willingness to consider different ideas and ask questions. Deep study. Gaining a deeper understanding is essential, whether it involves religious, philosophical, or scientific exploration. Limited knowledge often leads to hasty or one-sided conclusions. Spiritual depth. Spiritual truth cannot always be explained through logical evidence alone. It involves experience, faith, and inner wisdom. Balance. Science and faith should not be seen as opposing sides. Often, they together provide a more comprehensive understanding of the world. Criteria for choosing the right path. Perfect harmony. Truth should align with the ideal order of the universe. For instance, if the universe's laws are perfectly suited for the existence of life, it might be worth considering that its source could be divine. Seeking deep causes. Truth should not rely on superficial or self-serving arguments. It should answer questions such as, why are we here? And what is the purpose of life? Respect for others' perspectives. The fact that people make different choices does not necessarily mean they are wrong. Everyone has their own journey toward truth. Conclusion: you are correct that such significant questions like the origin of the universe and the purpose of humanity cannot be approached solely based on personal preferences. Seeking truth requires humility, openness, and profound reflection. Regardless of what one considers to be more accurate, the world reminds us that our knowledge is limited, and understanding the ultimate essence of truth may involve overcoming many obstacles.
It was very interesting to talk with you. We will definitely continue to talk about other interesting topics.
It was a pleasure talking with you too. I'm glad you found our conversation interesting. I'm always here whenever you want to explore more fascinating topics. Looking forward to our next chat.
If you liked our conversation or have any questions, write to me in the comments.